Today I'm going to share with you guys the story of Hansel and Gretel, which was passed down to me by my grandma. So here it goes. In the woods lived a poor woodsman and his wife, along with their two kids, Hansel and Gretel. The father could not provide the daily bread for his family, especially when a great famine came over the land. So one night, the mother suggested to the father that they should take the children deep into the woods and keep them there so that way they wouldn't be able to make their way back home. The father thought this idea was ridiculous, and he told the woman, "Are you mad? I do not want my children being eaten by wolves." And she told him that he was crazy because if they didn't go along with that idea, then they would just die of starvation. So, after a lot of haggling, the man finally agreed, and the children had overheard this, and Hansel decided that he would gather some pebbles and put them in his pocket, and he assured his sister that everything was going to be okay. So the next morning, they woke up and the mother gave them their piece of bread, and they started walking towards the woods. And Hansel kept looking back, and the father would ask him, "Why do you keep looking back, Hansel?" And Hansel replied, "Because the dog is trying to say goodbye to me." But in reality, he was putting down his pebbles. And the mother said, "You're a silly boy. There is no dog on the roof. It's just the sun hitting the roof." So they made their way towards the forest, and they were told to make a fire and go to sleep, and the parents would be back for them when they were done gathering wood. So they woke up, and they realized that the parents had never came back for them. Gretel was very scared, but Hansel assured her that everything was okay because the pebbles laid a path for them. So as they started walking towards their path, they found their house, and they knocked on the door, and the dad was overjoyed because he never wanted to leave his children there in the first place. A couple days passed, and they realized that another famine had came over them, and they only had a half of a bread left for all of them. So the mother suggested once again that they take the children deeper into the forest this time, and the father was not okay with that idea. He didn't want to go through with that, and the mother once again kept making him go along with the idea. So the children overheard this again, and this time Hansel was unable to collect any pebbles because the mother had locked all the windows and locked all the doors. So the next morning, they took their piece of bread and they all went to the forest. This time Hansel put the bread in his pocket and started laying breadcrumbs as a path. They got to the forest, were told to make a fire, and then once they woke up, there were no breadcrumbs left because all the birds had eaten them. So Gretel was worried, and Hansel assured her everything was okay and it was in God's hands. They walked through the forest and they found a gingerbread house which had lots of candy, cake, and icing, and they were ecstatic. They thought that they were in heaven, and they dug into the house. They ate the roof, they ate the windows, and all of a sudden they heard a voice. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who's nibbling at my house?" And the children replied, "Well, it's just the wind." And so then they just carried on eating, and the old witch came out once again and said, "Who's there? Who's there?" And the children dropped their food as they were terrified. But the woman assured them that there was nothing to be worried about, that she would welcome them in and feed them and give them a place to sleep. So they were ecstatic as they went to bed. But the next morning, the evil witch grabbed Hansel and she put him into a cage, and she woke Gretel up and said, "You need to go make a big meal for your brother because I'm going to make him fat and eat him." And Gretel was worried, but she had to listen, and so she did. And every day the evil witch would go to Hansel and say, "Show me your finger," and she'd touch his finger to see if it was fat, because she was blind. So he would actually stick out a bone so that she would think that he was just still too skinny. So eventually she grew impatient, and she told Gretel, "Today's the day. I don't care how fat or skinny he is, I'm going to cook him." And she said, "First we will be making some bread." So she took Gretel out into where her oven is, and it was burning with flames, and she told Gretel, "Stick your head inside and tell me if it's hot enough to put the bread in." But Gretel already knew her evil plan. So she said, I don't know how to do that. And so the evil witch said, well, if I can do it, so can you. And she stuck her head in, and Gretel had the chance to push her in, close the oven, and lock it. And that's exactly what she did. And as the evil witch was screaming and hollering, Gretel ran away, and she released her brother, and they found all the gold and the pearls and jewels that the evil witch had in her home, and they stuffed them in their pockets, and they found their way back home. And while they were gone, the mother had passed away, so they all lived happily ever after with no more worries. I hope you enjoyed the story.